programming, one of the things we talked a little bit about and you need to know about is that data comes in different flavors. And so far in Visual Basic, what we did with variables, for example, is we create a variable by going dim, and I could create the variable called int age as integer and set it equal to 16. So as you can imagine, age is generally going to probably be a whole number. You're either 1, 2, 3, 16, 50, 60 years old, right? So typically that's an integer. But sometimes things might not be integers. For example, I could have a program that has int cost as, and I would want to allow it to have a decimal. So for example, double, and it could equal $143.99. And so that would be a double, it would have a decimal. So those are two different data types. So integer is when you're dealing with whole numbers. And those whole numbers can be positive or negative. And there you see some examples. There's a range. They can only be as small as negative 2147483648 to as large as that. So that would be what? 2,147,483. So it gives you lots of numbers. So typically, if I'm using numbers, if they're whole numbers, I'll use integer. If it's going to have a decimal, I'll use double. Other formats that we won't really use in this course are going to be these: decimal, date, and char. Now, one thing students often say is, what is this E thing all about? And let me show you what the E thing is all about. So if I created a variable called DBL high score, and it's a double, and it might equal something like 131,000. Well, what 131,000 really is would be 1.31 E plus how many decimal places I would need to move 131 over. So I would need to move it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 digits. 3100 is 5 digits. So it'll be plus 5. And that's how I'd write 131,000. Okay, let's take a look at how we can make a little program. I'm going to make a variable and misuse it. So I'm going to create a variable called int number. And I'm going to say that int number is equal to the value of me text box 1's text. So the text in text box 1 is going to be turned into int number. And then the label, me label1 dot text is going to equal my number. So it's kind of a useless program, but I'm going to show it that the computer will do something called casting. And what I'm going to do in this example is I'm going to take int number, and it's going to be the text box. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say int number, which is integer, and I'm going to assign it the value of 3.7. How is 3.7 an integer? Hopefully people are already seeing a problem that, well, 3.7, that really can't be an integer. So let's run my program here, and we'll see what the label says that number is. So if I press play, and I put in 3.7, so me.textbox1 is going to be 3.7. When I click the button, it says 3.7 is 4. And the reason is because when I tell it to turn it into a value, it does. It turns it into the value of 3.7, but 3.7 is going to round to 4. So this is a bad use. This could potentially give you problems because if you're expecting 3.7 and I'm given 4, there's times when that would not be good. So I'm going to change this program, and instead I'm going to say int number is a double. And remember I said that doubles can have decimals. So when I press play this time, I'm going to put the same value of 3.7, but notice it's a double. And when I press a button, it says 3.7. The value is 3.7. So that's called casting. And what casting means is that the integer, the double rather, 3.7 is a double, it's cast to an integer, and so it would change that value to what it thinks, and in this case, a 4. The same thing happens when we use words. So Visual Basic, instead of making an error saying, oh, 1 hot dog, and I say, what's the value of 1 hot dog? The value of 1 hot dog, it says, oh, I see a number 1, and I'll ignore the rest. And so that's how it turns hot dog, 1 hot dog, which is text, which would be a string, into a number. Let's just quickly look at the other types of variables that we may use. Char is a single character. String is when I have several characters. And in Visual Basic, all our text boxes and labels and text properties are strings, of course. And then finally, the last type of variable we have is called Boolean. And a Boolean variable is true or it's false. And it can only be 2 values, true or false. And often the reason I like to use Boolean variables is when I want to make a program appear easier to read. For example, later on you're going to learn things like if-then statements, and I might create a variable Boolean called found, and I might say, you know, there might be some code in here, code to see if found, and I might have several lines of code to do that. And then in my code, once it's found or not found, I might write the line if found, then, you know, message box, you know, we found it. And this makes it easy to read. And so found would be a Boolean, which would be true or false, and if it's true, it's going to message box we found it. And so later on we'll learn that in programming as well and use that variable data type. So just a quick review of using integer division and mod. To use integer division, what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide and not divide by 5. Well, sure, I'll divide by 5. So I press play here, and anything I put in the text box, such as 16, I'll divide by 5, and 16 divided by 5 is 3.2. Great. Let me show you a different type of division, and that's integer division. If I put the slash backwards, this direction, that means integer division. And now when I press play, if I put that same number 16 integer division is 3. In other words, it truncates leftovers. Even though it's really 3.2, integer division means take the number 16, divide it by 5, and whatever the leftover bit, just get rid of it. So there's at least 3 times 5 goes into 16. Now, how can we find out what that leftover bit is? To find the leftover bit, or the remainder, as you might remember from your elementary math class, we use the keyword mod. How mod works is mod will do the division, in this case it'll divide it by 5, and mod will tell you what the leftover bits are. So for example, when I press play here and I take 16 and I divide by 5, the mod is 1. The leftover is 1. If I did 17, as you can imagine, the mod should be 2. And there it is, 2. So if I did 13, 13 divided by 5 is 2 with 3 left over. Let's try 14. 14 divided by 5 is 2 with 4 left over. 15 would be 0. There's none left over. It goes evenly. So we learned here that division tells us what the decimal value is. We learned integer tells us the integer division, how many whole parts go in at least. So if I do 14, it says there's 2 5s go into 14. And then finally, if I do mod, it tells me how many are left over.